Good morning, everybody. We'll get started in a moment. Okay, good morning, everybody, and we will get started. Thank you for joining us this morning on our webinar where we're talking about breaking free from legacy systems, the path to modern solutions. Thank you, Alan. So just quickly to go over some webinar etiquette, just saying that the session is being recorded and will be available on demand afterwards. So please feel free to watch again or share with any of your colleagues. You'll see there's also a Q&A box, and that's for any questions that you have for any of our lovely speakers today. So please do put in as many questions as possible and we will cover them off because we want this session to be as interactive as possible. You'll see there's a chat box also. That's really for any more technical questions, and my colleague in the background will be keeping an eye on that. So I'm Joyce Harman, I'm Head of Client Services, and I'm delighted to be joined today by a great panel. So Helga, if you'd like to do so.
Hi Joyce, so I'm Helga Redwoods, I'm Chief Financial Officer of the AAC.
Fantastic. And David?
Hi, I'm David Tillen, Business Development Manager here at Xledger.
And I'm Alan Perez-Trillo, Managing Director at Hart Square.
Thank you. So just quickly a little bit about Hart Square for those of you who are not aware of us. We're a consultancy practice that works in the non-for-profit space. And I suppose our new strapline that we've got out there that we don't sell technology, but we actually help make it work. So I'm not going to go through all the stats, but saying we've been doing this for over 16 years. So hopefully at this stage we know what we're doing. So over to you, Alan.
Thank you, Joyce. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today on this morning's call. And really what we wanted to do today was to help motivate and invigorate and give you the confidence to be able to take on the journey from breaking free from legacy systems and helping you modernize. And I think when we get into the discussion with Helga from ASC and David from Xledger, it's a really great and compelling story about what you can achieve. Helga's got some really insightful points to share. So helping to set the scene, I thought it was really just useful to start off by establishing what is a legacy system. So it's a software application typically. It could also be hardware, but for the purpose of what we're talking about today, it's a software application, a system or a platform that's outdated or obsolete for a few reasons that we'll look at in a minute, but it's still in use and the organization still depends on it and it's there to support critical functions. So that for us is a definition of a legacy system, and I'm sure that all of you on the call have got some experience of dealing with and working with legacy systems in your organizations. A couple of reasons why systems may become legacy. First and foremost, they're outdated, and this is kind of a catch-all statement for all things that relate to poor user experience. They may not be working well. They're quite just outdated in the way they look and work. They're enforcing old processes. So just general concept of being outdated. And that's usually from the user's perspective where that point gets mentioned often. It may be out of support in terms of the fact that the current provider no longer supports the solution, or that they've told you or notified you that they're no longer going to be supporting that version or that particular product after a certain date. And so that should be a very clear trigger to get you to moving forward or looking forward to new solutions. Incompatible, it's probably becoming incompatible with other solutions. So as you modernize other parts of your IT real estate, some systems can remain in the kind of legacy state and they no longer work with other systems, and that can cause a lot of problems, especially if your systems were always designed to be highly integrated and your users are expecting to work that way. You effectively have to do things in a reverse order. High cost. So this is a real issue with legacy systems. As systems become older, the providers tend to increase the costs of supporting those systems because their costs increase. They've got to maintain different teams, people, documentation, manuals. They've got to be able to support multiple versions. And so just hanging on to legacy items generally does tend to increase the cost of maintaining them, supporting them, and even licensing them. So high cost is definitely an indicator of a legacy system. Process dependency is one area that I think often gets overlooked. And process dependency is really about what I will always say is kind of, are your processes actually your processes? Or are they the system you've been using for 15 years and is it dictating your processes? And usually in those scenarios, it isn't actually that the issue is that the system's dictating your processes. There's nothing wrong with that in and of itself. But actually over time, more and more workarounds creep in. And those workarounds become your process. And actually, this happens quite often when we're looking at system replacement, is that people will look at the process and say, that's absolute the way we have to work. When actually, if you look at how new modern systems work, where lots of automation and workflow and better user experience and integration with other systems work, you actually don't need to hang on to lots of those old dependencies in your processes. You can move forward with a new product and be product led. And I think today's a great example of that as well. Perhaps the biggest one that's relevant these days, and I've left for last is the most important one there, is actually the increase of security risks. Now, I don't think that necessarily the two major retailers that have been in the news recently, that it's easy to identify that it's legacy systems that are the cause of that. But the more legacy systems you have, you create more holes in your infrastructure and you create things you have to worry about. So for all those other reasons, they create their own security risks. So if the product is no longer supported, you start in that sort of situation where it's probably working fine, but it's no longer supported. So if there is an issue, if there is an exploit in either the operating system or the database or some sort of part of the system, and it's there, the provider may not be prepared to patch it, to fix it and plug that hole. That means you carry all of the risk. Those security risks then in and of themselves create governance issues, regulatory issues. If anyone's aware of the various things that we now try and enforce, they're good things, Cyber Essentials, which is a security protocol, to try and get people to think about these things and to mitigate those risks. So really for me, the biggest one, apart from the obvious ones, they're around high cost, lack of engagement for users, is really high security risk. So what does this mean? Recent poll from Forrester looking at, unfortunately, US organizations in this case, but 76 of non-profit organizations queried said that they feel that legacy systems are holding back their digital transformation capabilities. And they're doing that because they want to remain current and relevant to their audiences, in this case, their donors or volunteers. But where it's quite surprising is actually of those, in a different report, 60 to 80% of people polled said that they're spending 60 to 80% of their current IT budgets managing or maintaining or supporting existing legacy systems. Now that leaves very little for you to go out there and start a process for changing these things. And often we see that the budget is often the thing that becomes the hardest thing to put in place to tackle a large system replacement. It usually precipitates the need for why you have to go and get an extraordinary budget and go to trustees or to your board. And that's why a business case is really important in this case. I thought this was a really good quote. I can't say I know the person well, but I think it's really important to take this on board. So every legacy system at some point in the past actually started out as the golden child. It was the thing that you invested in, you put all your time and energy in it, and it was the new golden child in your organization. But the reason it became legacy was not just the passage of time. It's the mistake we make is that it becomes hard to change and adapt. So we leave the legacy systems there. And every time we find a reason not to move, we build technical debt. And every time we build technical debt, it becomes hard to erode that technical debt. And very soon you end up possibly going down the sunk cost fallacy. Oh, it's too expensive to change, so we'll stay where we are. But kicking the can down the road really just exaggerates the problem, in my opinion. Before we move into some sort of points about what you can take away to help address these issues, I thought it really useful to share this quote from the great Winston Churchill, and that is, to improve is to change, to be perfect is to change often. And I think we don't necessarily need to strive to be perfect, but I think if we want to maintain our relevance and our ability to meet and continue delivering on our service users or our members or our donors or our volunteers and keep them aligned with our organizations and keep our organizations growing, we have to change. And changing often makes it easier to change rather than leaving change in big gulps that become difficult to swallow. Over to you, Joyce, for the poll.
Thank you, Alan. Right, so bear with me while I bring up the first poll. So what we're asking in this question is, what is your biggest challenge when considering a move away from legacy systems? So is it sort of recognizing that there is a need to change or modernize? Is it budget and costs, the justification for that? The risk around the business disruption, resistance from change from users, the complexity of the project, or uncertainty about selecting the right solution. So I'm going to let that run just for another few seconds. The complexity of the project is winning currently. So let me, okay, I'm going to end the poll there and let me share the results. So interestingly, the main two that are kind of on equal par was the complexity of the project and uncertainty about selecting the right partner. Budget quite a lot lower than I would have expected. Helga, any kind of thoughts on that? Would that sort of, any of that surprise you or chime with your experience?
So actually, the complexity of the project is interesting because having gone live with Xledger, we made a decision to just go live with the minimum because you can make the projects really, really complicated. So and then I've deliberately planned the next stage. So I think these projects can be complicated, but we can simplify them. And then, uncertainty on selecting the right solution. Yes, that definitely chimes with me, and that's why when I first got in contact with Hart Square, because we wanted to be able to run through a process and have the independence in the room to help challenge our thinking. So I think having somebody alongside me was really helpful.
Perfect, thank you. And yeah, David, anything there surprising you or different?
Yeah, not surprised. I think uncertainty, right solution, go hand in hand with most customers we work with. They've been on these on-premise systems for 20 years. It's a big change. So obviously it's uncertainty around that is common. And the complexity as well, of course, at least to that, obviously it's a big change. Sometimes it's the first time they're doing this kind of thing. So yeah, in terms of that, yeah, I'm not surprised at all.
Yeah, perfect, thanks. And also, yeah, Helga, I completely agree with your approach that it is complex, but you don't have to make it complex. So I think that's a really good summary. So right, I'm going to stop sharing and hand back to you, Alan.
Thanks. If only there was a consultancy that could help you with this. Thanks, Joyce. So moving on, I think looking at setting foundations and helping you get started, I think what we see often around tackling the legacy issue is that everybody knows the issue was there. So in some respects, you could say everything that I've kind of shared up to this point isn't necessarily new information to people on the call. So you've joined because you're probably thinking about how do you manage the legacy elements of your organization and what do you need to do about it. Like most challenging things, taking that first step and just getting started is really the secret to unlocking things. And so we thought we'd share some advice and guidance on how to take those first furtive steps to help you get things moving. So how do you get started? Key questions that we think you should ask yourself and your organization around setting the foundations for getting started. So from a strategic perspective, what are the technology goals for your organization? And that's really about what role does technology play in your organization? How important is it to you? Where does it fit in your strategy? As our user audience, that's both staff and call them customers, members, donors, volunteers, stakeholders. As all these people move to being far more digital in the way that we all engage these days on a more digital footing, how do we tackle that? How do we solve that? So technology is playing a bigger and greater role in organization strategies. And it's really just important to then figure out, well, what about technology is important? Where are we going to use it? And start writing these things down. What are the challenges that you face with the current technology? What are the problems you're trying to solve? Is the issue really about technology? Could it be that actually the technology is not the problem? Is it about the way it's used? And is that about skills and training? Is that about documentation? Quite often, sometimes what we will see is simply just finding a better way of reaching out to your current technology provider and expressing some of the issues you're having and being open to the fact that maybe you need to do something on your end could actually save you a lot of time and money by not having to go to market and go and find a new solution. So it is really important that you look at it with a critical eye and figure out, is there something you could be doing? And then a really important question, I think, whilst you're developing that strategy is there capacity within the organization to take on this technology change? Now, I think most people stop and think, actually, there isn't, so let's not do it. I don't think that's the solution, but I think it's acknowledging that there isn't necessarily the skills or the capability or the capacity in the organization to take that first step is great, because if you write it down, you can then look at, okay, what do I need to deal with that? What do I do to solve that issue? So that's a great one to start with. Then really being guided as well by the benefits. Do you have a clear set of documented benefits that a new solution should achieve? And I think there is really great value in looking at it from the benefit side of things and writing those down. If you're a CFO like Helga, I'm sure the high cost of your current systems is one of the big issues. And I'm sure Helga's got some thoughts on that. So I think it's great to write those down. I will caution, however, that when you're starting to create those benefits, don't overdo them. If you're creating unrealistic expectations and writing statements about how it's going to fundamentally change everything that you do, you set a high bar and you set a very high standard, and then it becomes quite difficult when the project isn't necessarily delivering on all of those unrealistic expectations. So focus on the benefits, but just try not to set them to being too great and too high. Question, how can you measure them? It's really important to understand how you can measure those benefits so that when you start devising your project and you start working towards things, you can actually see how you're going to tackle them. How does it fit into the strategy? How can we make those benefits part of our future strategy? Are they aligned? Are they going to help us get closer to our goals, or are they going to take us further away? And really important, is our timeline realistic? Can we do this in time? Now, one of the reasons timeline's important is quite often legacy systems, in terms of the solutions we're involved in, it's most often the reason for moving is not because we want to achieve greater alignment with our stakeholders or want to improve efficiencies. It's actually because the system we're on has told us we have to go. So they dictate the timeline. And if you're honest about that, that shapes your project, that shapes how you tackle it. And I think that's kind of what Helga was alluding to when she said, we didn't try and achieve everything. We're going to tackle it as we go. We really needed to be in a good position and not make the project too complicated. Then, of course, really looking at risk. What are the consequences of not taking action? And that for me is the key question that should really be asked whenever you're sort of thinking, oh, it's too hard, it's too expensive, it's too time consuming, I won't tackle this challenge. And write down what are the consequences of not taking action. And I think that helps shape the mind, and it helps put kind of meat on the bone to help take it further forward. We're all aware of the risks. Is everybody aware of the risks? And is there a plan to mitigate them? And then really important, who is the person who's going to make the decisions to mitigate that risk? Who's going to make the call about which direction to go? Are they all aligned? Does everybody understand? So making those decisions is really important. Then looking at considerations for what should you start thinking about when you're moving away from a legacy system. Again, strategic alignment, I think we repeat this point quite often, but it is really critical to start here. Look at your organizational strategy, or 1, 3, or 5-year strategy, and understand what role does technology play and what are we trying to achieve with new technology. Do and conduct a system audit. Understand what you have is a really important purpose. Understand what it's doing. Also understand what it's maybe not doing. Capture your requirements is subtly different. Capturing your requirements should be a little bit more future focused. It should be looking at what you're trying to achieve, not just a repeat of what you're currently doing. So if there is ambition in your strategy, if there are opportunities that you want to tackle, you'd need to bring those in. Again, caution how ambitious you can be. I think it's great to write down your requirements, but then do test them. How important are they for replacing the current solution? Because that helps you make it iterative and you can do things in a slightly more agile way rather than making things a big, complicated project. Again, going back to now starting to develop your strategy and really thinking about what are the people, who are the people that are going to work on this, who are going to be affected by it? Who do you have to bring along? Who do you have to motivate? Who do you have to train? All of those questions around people. And I've put that first because I think it often gets put to the back of the queue when developing the transformation strategy. I think it should be at the start of the queue. Because no project is ever done without people, and it certainly shouldn't be done to them. It should be done with them. Then looking at your processes, again, as I was saying, I think a lot of organizations' processes are dictated by their legacy systems. I think you can look at your processes in a higher level and try and understand, what are you trying to achieve? What's the goal? What is the purpose behind these processes, and how can they be optimized? Do recognize that if you go to a new product, your product will influence those processes. So that needs to be done probably in a two-phased approach. Data is critically important. Understand your data. Your data is going to have to move. Even if you're moving, infrastructure systems, data still has a role to play. Understand its quality and its recency and where it's used, and use this as an opportunity to clean it and to get all your data in order. Stakeholder engagement, make sure that you've taken users' input on board, identify champions who are going to help you drive this change. Get them on board, enable and empower them, and listen to them when they say they have challenges or they have concerns or issues, because if they're not on board, it becomes very hard for them to lead the change for everybody else. Write down and define measurable objectives, things you can look back on and say, have we achieved these? What do we need to achieve them? And make sure that they're realistic, but also a bit ambitious. Costs and options. This is an area that we often help clients at the start of sort of a journey, is understanding what a move will cost. What does the landscape look like? What are your options for taking this change on board, and how best to manage that process? And then something that I'd encourage just really thinking about is, how do you enable continuous improvement into your long-term vision, so that you can start this journey by saying, how am I going to actively avoid building legacy systems going forward? So build that into your plan and think about how you're going to maintain it. And that means thinking about the budget, about going past go live. How do you ensure that there's budget for training and for new features or new solutions to be enabled? Don't just think about the project and go live. So worth looking at risks at this point. Some of them are quite obvious and we've already covered, but it is worth just writing them down. So lack of buy-in is really important. Ensure that everybody understands the benefits and bring them along. Maintaining your business as usual systems, your legacy systems, whilst you're taking on a new project can also be challenging. This is probably more of an IT support person role, but if they're required to work on the project and they're required to do things on the legacy system, something's got to give. Poor resourcing. Have you got the right skills at the right time in the right place to manage the change? That can be a big risk. Scope change really depends on the type of project you're taking on board, but as the project starts to develop, how are you going to manage change? How are you going to decide if change is needed? If it's critical to the first phase of the project, can it be delayed? What is its impact? And trying to manage change is really kind of a key governance question. Big issue here with taking these projects on is a lack of decision making. In almost every project, there will come a time when the project slightly derails, or there's a key question, or there's an element that hasn't been thought about. And at that point, decision making needs to come to the fore, and it shouldn't be at that point figuring out who makes the decision and how and why. That should be in place before you start that process. A really big one that's becoming an issue in a number of projects that we see is the lack of change management, recognizing that the technology change and the project and the data and all that stuff is hard, but it's known. Change management is really hard if you've just not really thought about how you're going to bring people along, and it really is linked to the buy-in topic. And I think the point there is to communicate, and when you're sick of communicating, communicate again, because people probably didn't hear you the first 3 times. Poor budget control, again linked to scope change. Understand the budget, understand what things will cost. Do create a contingency and make sure you understand why and where it can and should be used. And that again links into the decision making. And then a risk around poor project governance is just not understanding, what's the right way to manage a project, and links to a lot of how you mitigate these risks that we've got on screen. So it's sort of wrapping things up, just to help get you started, 3 steps in terms of what we think you could and should do. When you're starting to create a business case, that really should probably be the first point. Define what the problem is, understand the parameters in terms of what are the deadlines you need to worry about, align it with your strategy, and cover what's working and what isn't. Often with legacy replacement, people focus on what isn't working, but do remember there's some good stuff in there that you want to replicate and maintain. So write it down and assess what replacement costs and your options are. Then moving to requirements gathering, reach out to the organization if it's organization wide, even if it's departmental. And I think there's a great story for that Helga can tell here about how this change has helped change the profile of her team. Is there will be broader impacts beyond just the core department that's affected by it. Reach out to them, make sure that everybody understands and they're aware of it, because they can also support you in it. And it's not just about who you ask, but it's about how and what you ask in terms of those requirements. Understanding what's pertinent, what's essential, what could be a nice to have, what's actually going to help deliver that strategy, and ensure that people are taken on board to take ownership. And then really important as well is just setting your priorities. Understand what's essential, what's nice to have, and recognize that you will have to make some compromises to achieve the right priorities. So without further ado, we thought it was worth moving to a quick poll.
Yes, thank you, Alan. So let me just bring this up. So what we're just asking in this poll is, where are you currently in your journey to replace or modernize your legacy systems? So are you at that business case stage? Are you just looking and exploring your options? Are you planning your requirements? You're actively implementing your new system, or you have no plans to change or staying with your current system? So I'm going to let that run for another second or two. Most people at the minute are implementing a new system, then followed by exploring and requirements gathering. So I'm going to end that poll and let me just share the results. So yes, so most people on the call, 50%, are actively selecting or implementing a new system, and then closely followed by that exploring or requirements gathering stage. So I'm going to stop sharing because I now want to bring in Helga and David, who we all want to hear from. So Helga, if I go to you first, I suppose, can you tell us a bit about your background and ASE?
Okay, and thanks Joyce. So hello everybody. I'm as you know, Helga. I trained as a chartered accountant. I've got a background in retail, financial services, and the charity sector. And I'm currently working for the Aquaculture Stewardship Council, ASC for short, which was launched back in 2010. And the mission of the Aquaculture Stewardship Council is making aquaculture, so seafood farming, more sustainable. So what we do is we set the standards, environmental and social standards, and then provide assurance throughout the supply chain. Just to give a sense of scale in terms of the organisation, our income level is about 14 million sterling. So we do everything in euros, so I always struggle a bit when I translate it into sterling. So that's, yeah, that's me and ASC.
Perfect, thank you. And David, a bit about you.
Hi everyone, thanks Joyce. I'm David Tillam, Business Development Manager here at Xledger. I've been with Xledger now 16 months, background in the software space, and now primarily focused with non-profit, charity and social housing organisations who are exactly moving off legacy systems onto hopefully our cloud finance system. A bit about Xledger. Xledger is a true cloud finance system, launched back in 2006, and we've been in the UK now for 13 years. We've grown organically to now support over 11,000 customers globally. Xledger itself, as I said, it was born on the cloud back in 2006. Core functionality really, and what sets us apart is not just the support team, but also we look to automate your daily financial processes, either integrate with your other systems, deliver real-time financial reporting and powerful consolidated reporting, and provide a system that's flexible to scale at ease as your organization grows.
Now, once again, the detail on the project, because this is a really interesting project. So right, Helga, what were the main drivers for change at ASC? What were the problems that needed solving?
Right, so I joined ASC about 2.5 years ago, and it was clear almost immediately that the finance system was no longer fit for purpose. So, you know, and like Alan was talking about some of the legacy systems, you know, there was risks that we were running in terms of the finance system was sitting on Citrix, whereas, you know, the rest of the organization were all using on cloud-based tools, using SharePoint, and just putting the IT to one side. What that created was a silo for finance. So not only were the finance team working somewhere differently from everyone else, they were actually acting differently as well, and were quite isolated. So so the whole problem that needed solving was not just the finance system, because I didn't have any purchase ordering, the reporting was poor, there was lots of manual processing, the product itself was end of life, so that was all kind of a given. The big change that I wanted to make was to bring the finance team more into the center, because that's where I believe they should be, because ASC has a culture of empowered collaborative. And what that means is that we actively seek to get decision making at the most appropriate level, rather than having it all come up to the top, because that just slows things down. Let's devolve decision making, and you can only do that if you have a finance system where the decision makers can actually access the information that they need. So it's more than just getting purchase ordering, more than just the reporting. It's a whole transformation piece.
Yeah, and I think that's really interesting, as you say, because a lot of these projects, it's not just about replacing the kit. There's a wider issue around that. So kind of saying, you know, thinking about where the finance team was sort of seen and the system internally. So how did you go about getting agreement with the rest of the management team on, you know, what to change and agreeing the budget, which is always fun?
Yeah. Well, the first thing I did on arriving was develop a strategy on financial resilience. Alan said we'd mentioned strategy a few times, so that I identified what needs to happen in the broader sense. So ultimately, want to bring in business partnering, etc. All that good stuff. But stage one was in order to do that, I need to have the tools for the job, and clearly I didn't have those tools as we currently stood. So I don't put that as part of my strategy and plans, which then meant that I started to make the case for budgets, even though I didn't really, I just had ballpark figures. And because, you know, I have done a number of system implementations in the past, so had a sense of what that might be. And then just built in contingency for implementation, and took that through the normal channels, made the case to the trustees and the rest of my executive team.
Perfect. And then, so once you covered out the strategy piece, then what process did you go through to, you know, gather the requirements and agree on the scope of the project?
So initially, just started drafting our own thoughts and the pain points. I got the senior management team, did some brainstorming, got some post-it notes and things like that to gather, you know, what would be their top 3 things that they'd like to see. What are their pain points as well? And then, having done that, that's when I contacted Hart Square to really help us get into the nitty-gritty of what did we need to put into the tender process, because what I was sensing was that we were starting to articulate what we already had. And I wanted to ensure that we were challenging ourselves effectively to capture not what we have, but what we need to have for the future. And Hart Square helped us with our thinking in terms of just not documenting what we've already got.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because very often you could end up just recreating, you know, kind of bad processes, bad practices in a shiny new system, and that doesn't really sort of move you on forward. David, I wanted to bring you in. So from your side of things, and, you know, the projects that you run, thinking about that requirements gathering, that scoping out a project, are there any areas that you think clients really should focus on?
Yeah, there are multiple areas. I think first and foremost, or as it sounds, contractually, look at look at your current policies with your current system, what your notice periods are. Importantly, look at your data accessibility as well. How easy can you extract that data? Where is it stored? Are there costs involved? Just from our experience, data migration is a key area here.
Yeah.
And from a functionality point of view, echoing what Alan said earlier, and also Helga, you're not trying to copy what you've been doing before. It's digital transformation. You're trying to streamline and automate those processes. We always recommend you start at the end goal, what then reports you're trying to achieve, the outputs, the processes you're trying to streamline, and work backwards from there and find a solution that will help achieve those needs and not just fit into another solution. There are some other areas, of course, cloud-based. Obviously, it's becoming more and more costly to stand still, and obviously cloud-based avoids that need for the on-premise infrastructure support and security support. Integration, key area. Whatever system you're looking for needs to have that open integration approach, or if you're going to all-in-one or best of breed, making sure that integration is key, so you can have a single source of truth and real-time reporting. And then another thing to worry about, as we've already mentioned already, is resource. It's such a key area that's underestimated. Just making sure you consider the internal resources you require from a also project management perspective, to ensure you have the right people and the time allocated to make sure this is successful.
Yeah, absolutely. Which nicely follows on to my next question to Helga, which were there any areas of particular challenge on the project? My examples were going to be resourcing, data migration, all the great ones David's just said. So yeah, from your side, Helga, were there any particular challenges?
Yeah, so I think Alan had on the slide about change management, and I think that was the biggest the biggest one, and it's not around the system. So Xledger is highly configurable, and as accountants we all know how things are going to work roughly. It's just making choices. So the systems usually work fine. It's the people, and the people side that was more challenging. And what I found was that people don't know what they don't know, and it takes a lot of time to help people to understand. And in my case, that was purchase ordering, and because that was a big shift, but not just for the wider organization. It was a shift for finance as well, because if you've not used that, not come across it, then it is a big change. And so I wish I'd had more time, would be one of the things. But what we ended up doing was the finance team ran drop-in sessions and things like that. But the main thing that helped us overcome some of that challenge is that we ended up again, Hart Square came to the rescue with flow charting, our processes, and so I've now got all my processes are backed up with flow charts. And I love flow charts, but it wasn't the actual having the chart at the end. It was the conversation that bringing the team together and talking through how all the steps worked that helped me enormously with the understanding of what, and the team in terms of what they needed to change. And then we were able to use the tools that we developed from the flow charting to help the organization. But I'd completely underestimated the time that takes, and just underestimated that people are in different places, and it takes, if you haven't seen it before, it takes you a long time to understand it. The other side is testing. So we had a bit of a burning platform because it's an old legacy system. So I made the decision we had to go live because we were going to be out of support and all the risk areas that Alan said. And that was at the detriment of testing. And that meant that we were still learning on the job when we went live. So yeah, the biggest challenge is change management, people, and I would have liked to have had more time testing.
Yeah, it's always one challenge. David, you've kind of touched on the challenges. Is there any other ones that you think that you sort of find in your experience?
Yeah, again, ones I've touched on before. Resources are always the biggest one, not just the technical resource you need for testing and integrations and things like that. And also, it's also the decision-making process, which Alan talked about earlier, defining your project team, making sure there are people with ownership at making certain decisions at certain phases of the project, which help drive the project forwards. Also, I think key is having, and this is what ASC did very well, is having core finance in the projects at awareness of their financial systems within the project team as well, which helps drive those decisions forward as well. Bringing the right people in at the right time, that's not always the case. I understand from our project team is that both Hart Square and ASC did really well is bringing in key stakeholders and budget holders at the right time, but also making decisions with ourselves and making sure the decisions internally were kept separate and with the right people, which also really helps us stop any confusion. Also the BAU resource, which Alan talked about earlier, it's in terms of you've got to your BAU requirements. It's maintaining that day-to-day operations while you're implementing your system to ensure internal teams have the capacity to do both. And if they don't, maybe look to bring in some partners or temporary resource to help manage that. But also, not talked about enough, manage stress levels within the team as well. I think that's a key thing. It's a big thing for a finance system as well. Other things to bear in mind with that resource as well is things like your financial year-end audits that are coming up. Anything that's going to take that resource away, momentum away from the project. So those are other risks to be mindful of before you start. And data migration, a key area. I already spoke to it already, but in terms of that data migration piece, your new system is only as good as the data you put into it. And I think if you can get ahead of the curve on that, it really does. It's the most resource intensive period at the beginning of a project. Start thinking about your supplier registers, your chart of accounts, all of those things. They're a good start, and you'll see the benefit when you do start the project.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And then sort of next question, which we've touched on a bit already, so I'll sort of change it slightly. Thinking about that, communications to the team to get buy-in, to get everybody, to understand the impact of the project. I know, Helga, you mentioned drop-in sessions and things like that. But was there anything in particular that you did to really get the team to understand the long-term benefits, like the why we're doing this?
Yeah, so I actually forgot to mention in the introduction that ASC is a global organisation. So I got over 19 payrolls in different countries. And we all work remotely, and we have company calls on a weekly basis, and right from the start of the project, started to share, the why we were doing it. So the reason for change that I've outlined already, and then what would it mean for staff and to manage their expectations in terms of what I'd need them to do, and to get them on board that way. There was a quick win. So again, as an international organisation, that you can imagine there's quite a bit of travel. So the expenses module that Xledger had was a real big quick win for us, because it handles multi-currency and you can just do it on your app on the phone. Not that I'm selling Xledger here, but it was fantastic to have that on Go Live, because that was a pain point for people, and it's helped resolve an issue very quickly. And we talked about champions. We found champions, so got people to talk about who'd come across similar systems, who went, oh yes, this will work great. And then they were the ones in the background go, you haven't quite got this bit right, you might like to think about this. So exactly what Alan was saying, and we hadn't swapped notes beforehand, that I found really beneficial. And in terms of just getting that buy-in, there's kind of an emotional buy-in from the organisation as well, because I just knew things were not going to go, something's going to happen. You always think it's going to be perfect, and it isn't. There's going to be a problem somewhere. So on Go Live, we again got all the staff together, and we were telling them how to do things, how to do purchase ordering. And I used an analogy, which today, even to this day, people talk about it, because I likened it as the finance team we've just learned to drive. And on Go Live, this is our first day of driving on the road. We've just put our L plates to one side. And our first job is to teach everybody else how to drive. Except we're actually going to go onto the continent, and we're going to drive on the other side of the road. And we've still got to teach them. So that's what it feels like on day one. So it's like, please, guys, everybody, just be patient and be kind. Because David mentioned managing stress levels. That's the actual just looking after each other and sharing with people that this is a big thing that we're doing, but I need everybody to just understand that and just help us as we get through it, because then we will help them as well. So yeah, we're learning together is how I put it.
I love it. I love the driving analogy. It's brilliant. David, just quickly, any other thoughts on, so you have that communication buy-in piece?
Yeah, exactly. Clear communication throughout the whole process, and something that Hart Square did right from the off, and ASC. I think also having an internal champion higher up with Helga helps drive these projects forward in terms of helps mitigate those concerns. What was evident in the procurement process and also afterwards is that stakeholder engagement was early. I think that really benefited that acceptance and the enthusiasm for a new project. And also it's interesting, obviously, Helga's on about change management. Our feeling, we thought from yourselves, we thought your actual company culture and actual drive and purpose of the company, everyone knew how quickly you've grown over the last few years and everyone knew you had to change. And the feeling we had was, well, I've gone blue. Have I? Oh no. The feeling we had was, yeah, that really does help that change management piece. I think everyone understanding or helping employees, not replacing employees' jobs, but that's a big thing as well. But actually, how we're going to improve your day to day, and everyone knowing that, I think, were key feedback we had and why this was accepted so well in comparison.
Yeah, absolutely. So Helga, you've recently gone live, a couple of months now with the new system. Any lessons learned or advice you would give somebody else embarking on a similar project?
I think some of them we've already covered. So managing the stakeholders, or trustees we haven't mentioned. I just keep them on board, a regular drumbeat of communication, right through to, as we're going through the transition, we've just gone through our year end. Someone mentioned having running 2 systems. So just going, we don't know what's going to happen. I might need some flexibility in deadlines. Actually, that's happened for a different reason, and they all understand it. So I've got their backing as well. So develop a clear communication plan, a comprehensive training plan. That one, even though we talked about it, caught me out a little bit because I suddenly was looking for a trainer, then realized it was me.
Yeah.
And I'm not a natural trainer. So don't get caught out in that one like I did. But I got through it because I had screenshots and flowcharts that worked on with Hart Square. So that was, I didn't feel quite so bad. But yes, set up systems and support systems. So you get a lot of questions when you go live. Telling the organization, yes, in this case I did tell them how to communicate, or else you just get completely overwhelmed. So we've got our own little X-Ledger support email as an example. So don't email everybody in finance. And also, please, the organization, just give me 5 minutes to respond, because that's the other thing we found was, so give yourself some means for the organization to communicate with you. Data migration. Having learned from previous projects, we didn't migrate a load of data. We just did our opening balances. We can access the data if we want to. And the reason why I chose to do that is that in a previous project, spent a lot of time and money doing all the data migration and didn't really use it. And I don't, unless you have to, I wouldn't recommend it. Project management. The Xledger have excellent project managers for this software. I'd recommend having a project manager for the whole project, because you have to manage not just the systems implementation, but the communication, the training, the running the business, your year end. So getting all of that into one plan is something that you have to do yourselves. That's not Xledger project manage the implementation of the software and do that extremely well. Got very good project managers, by the way. And remind yourself, it's not just a finance project. It's not just about the systems. It's about the wider side of things. So and the wider transformation, and celebrate success. So we've saved over 1 full-time equivalent. We're freeing up more and more time, which has enabled us to move on to the more value-added type work. And do we stop and celebrate it? No, we're continuing just going, right, what's our next problem we've got to solve? So I've got to deliberately go, right, no, this is great. Look what we've done so far. Yeah. And the other advice is just be kind to yourself and your team. David mentioned stress levels. Right from the get-go, I said to the team, this is a marathon.
Yeah. We've
got to book holidays still. You've got to have time off. We're not working every single weekend because it's a long project. And so plan for those type of things. Yeah, the lesson: just be kind, be kind to yourself.
No, absolutely. I mean, Helga, that's fantastic. And I think I know when we were sort of speaking the other day as well, is around that the change of the profile of the finance team within the organization, and that was a really, really big impact, and had a really positive side of things as well. So I think that was really good. Right, I'm doing my conscious of time, so I'm going to quickly hand back to Alan for a summary slide, and then we're going to get to questions.
Great, thank you, Joyce. We're at that point where we like to leave some sort of tips that you can take away. I will go through these fairly quickly because I think the value here is answering some of those questions with Helga and David. We will put this in the email to follow up as a PDF. But start with a clear purpose. Again, make sure that it's anchored in a good, well-defined business case is really important. Helga's, brought it up really well. Engage people early and often. Great point about don't forget the trustees as well. Cleaning house is kind of a wrapper for things like make sure the data is right before you bring it in. It's always easier to fix those duplicates before they come into the system because then it's hard to see what's good. And then, simplify your processes wherever you can. Look to weed out bad habits, bad things that have crept in, which are led by legacy projects. Test. And we're seeing this as something that we're helping clients more and more with because it's not necessarily a skill in the organization, but it still means it needs to be done. So I think that is the current battleground. Test. And ensure that you have time to train people. I think Helga was leading into that just in terms of planning it, etc. And make sure that you can enable those champions. I think when you're training, try and train the champions so that you can spread the load. That'll make it easier on you if you are the project champion or the product owner. And then don't forget to review and define. So define what good looks like, and then try and monitor it and make sure that you've got a way to continue refining it post-launch, and ensure that you always have a budget to keep the thing going and fresh. It's massively mitigated by using cloud-based platforms like Xledger because they maintain a lot of it for you. That's a massive, often unseen benefit, but you still have to maintain the solution and invest in people and training and how you adopt it. So a key one that I think often gets lost is assign a system owner. I think in Helga's case, it feels like the product owner is Helga, which is great, but I think it's always important to have one person who owns it, especially post go live. They're the ones who can work with your technology partner and help drive that innovation going forward. So over to Q&A.
Thank you. So we've lots of questions. We're probably not going to get through them all, but we will answer the other ones offline afterwards. So, question: it would be good to know ways to ensure how the system we choose will scale and grow with us. So I'm going to come to you first, Helga. So when you were looking at choosing the system, how important was it, and in your decision making, to make sure the system you choose could scale and grow with you?
Yeah, that was very important. And we looked at various options because I wasn't sure, to be fair, where we would need to sit in the market in terms of how much do we need to invest, and the scalability of different solutions. So yes, that was something that we did before we went out to tender, and I'm going to sound like I'm plugging Hart, but Hart Square helped us with that options analysis because I wanted to get to the decision as to whether would we need to go for a very, very large system because we do plan to grow, or not. So yes, I don't know if I've answered that properly, but
No. Yeah, I think it's kind of looking at what is the wider picture, where do you want to go long term?
Yes.
David, sort of thoughts on that when you're with clients, sort of where they are and thinking about that longer term
I
partnership.
think when it comes to that, I think look at the system. Is it cloud native, or has it just been lifted from on-premise into the cloud environment? I think the products that are born in the cloud have that flexibility and that scalability to grow in the cloud, and they're born for it. But most important thing, ask for references as well. Ask for, you don't want to believe the sales guy, you want to listen to our customers and their experiences of it as well and how they've grown. And obviously during the process, as both Hart Square and ASC did, went through our structures, how we work, how we configure the system, and it's all of that good stuff. That's how you can mitigate those kind of risks.
And if I could just add, and looking at the roadmap of the partner as well. So Xledger have a roadmap for improvement. So it wasn't just selecting the software, it's selecting a partner that we can work with, and because you'll be looking to develop, David, in terms of your solutions going forward. So we're looking for somebody who we could work with into the future, not just solve the immediate problems.
Absolutely. My head of product's going to kill me for not mentioning that. So yes, absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. Right. I'm going to try and get another question in. How much of a consideration was the cutover from the old system to the new system? And did this impact your decision making on how long the project would take, Helga? So the sort of that cutover point from old to new, the go live date.
Yeah. So in terms of go live date, I went for the year end. And the reason I did that, as I mentioned, I wasn't going to transfer across data. So it feels like a nice clean cut. Now, obviously choosing that date means you've got a year end to do at the same time as going live with the new system. And it's, it's not without its challenges. However, I've had experience of doing an implementation in the middle of the year as well. And that just led to a whole heap of other challenges. And I prefer the option of going live on year end. And as I say, we haven't transferred any data across. So I think that's all I can add to that, I'm afraid.
No, that's perfect. I want to just get in another question really quickly because I could talk about data all day long. David, I'm going to come to you quickly on this. So you mentioned about data migration. What are the most common pitfalls to avoid during data migration? Because they say, Helga, you took a different approach, but David, in general, data migration.
Yeah, a couple of things. What I would have mentioned, how long it takes, how long it takes to clean your data and what formats you get that data out your old system. You're going to have to map, and that mapping process will take time as well. But also to highlight what Helga said, really challenge how much data you're bringing off. You're bringing across movements, transactions. Why are you bringing that? What do you need to report on? Why are you bringing that data across? Do you need to report on it now? Hence, bringing those movement transactions, or can you store it for audit purposes and read-only access? So it's just highlighting the reasons why you're bringing it and how much. I think from our experience, most customers bring 1 or 2 years, and then the rest they'll store historically. But yeah, those are considerations to think about.
Perfect.
It takes time.
Exactly. Yeah, it takes time and it's not easy. I'm going to sneak in one other question, which is not a quick answer, but how do we know if it's time to replace our system entirely or just upgrade certain components? So I suppose, Helga, I'm going to reposition that for you to go. For you, the decision to change was that it just wasn't working. Could there have been an option to maybe do a slight upgrade, or was it you had to do everything?
Well, we could have stayed, I guess, but I mean, I just couldn't work. I couldn't do my role with the software we've got. So I forgot to mention we've got 4 entities. I just couldn't do a consolidation. So yeah, there was too many obstacles. It's when you can't do your day job and you're adding staff to do processes. So it was, and just to say the change in terms of cost going forward, it's going to cost me the same with the new system as it did for the old system.
Perfect. That's very interesting. Right. I'm going to hand back to Alan because otherwise we'll run out of time. So thank you for all those questions. There's some we haven't answered. We will answer those all offline. So David and Helga, I'll be following up with you afterwards. So Alan, back to you. Oh, can't hear you, Alan.
Okay.
Sorry, thanks. I thought it was useful to end on a quote. The great Jack Welch, and I really like this one: change before you have to. So take that, hopefully that's useful advice. Thank you to everyone who joined us today. Quick plug for TechSmart. So TechSmart is back, the technology focused event for charities and membership organizations. It is in St. Paul's, London, 23rd of September. We would love to have you all join us. I think Xledger, you are one of our sponsors at the event, so it'd be great to have you there, but also to meet other technology partners and people from the industry that you can network with and learn from as well. So thank you to our guests, to Helga, as always a pleasure, and thank you so much for sharing your insights and your thoughts and your experience. I think some people have got some real great takeaways from that. David, again, also thank you. Awesome to have you on board and for sharing it, and what sounds like a really amazing and transformational project, which is we really strive to do. It's what we do here at Hart Square, and hope to see these things happen more and more. So thank you both to our guests. Thank you for Joyce for running a great webinar. And just to remind everyone, we run these sort of webinars once a month. So if you found it useful, please do check out our events hub and register for any future events. Thank you to everyone for joining, and we hope you have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.